Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Simple Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. I am your host, Corey Conklin, the Creative Keto Cook. And today we have Brian Sanders. Brian is he has the Peak Human podcast, which is where I originally found him. We met at the very shortened Low Carb Denver this year, the last low carb conference of 2020, as far as I can tell. And he also is working on a movie we'll get into called Food Lies, which I'm looking forward to seeing. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Yeah, Low Carb Denver. I mean, it's maybe the last conference for a while.
Yeah, I was actually working on one for February in South Carolina, and trying to get vendors to commit to anything was just not possible. So we're like, well, we're just going to have to wait. And I know of a couple of others that just said, that's it, we're going to wait till 2022 because state governments were like, we can't guarantee anything for next year. So they said, forget it. We'll just wait till 22 and go on from there. So one of these days we'll all get back together and have a big party.
Absolutely.
So let's just go ahead and start with your story. What got you into the keto low carb space? And we'll go from there.
Yeah. So it's kind of multifaceted. Actually, now I think there's three things really. It was my friends, my family, and myself. It's usually how it goes, right? You have these influences. And so usually people don't start taking their health seriously until they're either sick themselves, maybe later in age, middle age, or their family gets sick. And so I was about 30 and I lost both my parents to chronic disease. And that really woke me up. And right about then, my friends started kind of getting into this primal space, I guess you could call it, where I guess I call it that because I started with the Primal Blueprint by Mark Sisson.
Yeah.
You know, he's just like a great book, great guy.
Yep.
And it just shook up all my ideas about nutrition. And the sad part was my family and I followed the food pyramid well. You know, our whole lives, we were doing the thing. We're doing the low fat. We were doing skinless chicken breasts, vegetables, all the pasta and rice. I grew up in Hawaii. You know, you eat rice.
Yeah.
And you know, we thought we were doing fine, but they just kept getting sort of more overweight and more sick. They weren't even obese. They were never obese at all. I mean, they just had like sort of the beer belly type of look, or, you know, that type of thing where you don't really know you're sick. The modern medicine, the modern America and the world doesn't really recognize these people as going down the right path. They're like, oh yeah, that's how you look when you get older. And I was kind of accepting that as well. So I made all my own food. Growing up, we didn't go to fast food barely at all. It was a big special treat. We were making our own food, doing all the things. I did all those good habits, supposedly good habits, through my 20s. And I just started to become that dad bod look. And then I realized I didn't have to be that way. I made a few changes, and all of a sudden I dropped from a 32 waist to a 28 waist. And I didn't do anything. I didn't count calories. All I did was change my food choices. Still cooked for myself. Everything was the same, right? Nothing changed. I didn't work out differently. I didn't do anything differently.
Yep.
Food choice changed. It was so simple. It's just cut out all the refined grains, or just grains in general, just lower carb. It's so simple. And then I just thought I needed to make a film. I needed to let people know about this. And the real sort of inciting incident was not the game changer. Sorry. That was more recently. It was What the Health. So that was 3 years ago. So I saw What the Health that summer 3 years ago. And I was a mechanical engineer by trade, and I worked in tech, but I grew up with film. So I started getting back into film around that time. And I just thought, hey, I could make it a film. You know, I saw What the Health. I was like, they're just spouting lies. This is obviously just anti-meat propaganda film. And there needs to be an answer to this. So that's my story.
Good. For those that have not seen What the Health, it's basically if I remember correctly, a vegan film saying, don't eat meat, eat veggies. And as you said, it is a propaganda film, because if you actually sit down and go through the literature and the science, meat is as we'll get into, one of those bioavailable forms of all of the nutrients that are good for our bodies. And so I guess where you at with the film? I know that you were hoping to get that out, but how's that going along? And what are you going to try? I guess what's the story behind it, or what, what is
Mm-hmm.
your focus? Because I know originally you were going to, if I remember correctly, you were going to work with Vinny Tortorich, and then it turns out you guys had different ideas and decided to head in different directions. So what is going to be the focus of the film?
Well, yeah, it's been kind of a long process. I mean, Game Changers took 5 years to make at
Mhm.
least. And so we're trying to finish it up. Yeah, this whole lockdown kind of shook our plans and pushed us back a year, but I think it's fine.
Mhm.
The film's getting better by the month. I kind of have time to reevaluate. I spent a lot of the lockdown rewriting the whole film, rethinking about it. I have a great director, editor, DP guy that I'm making it with, that I grew up and I actually was making films with growing up.
Okay.
And he continued on in the film world, and he's really accomplished in that regard. So and he also does this lifestyle himself. So
Okay.
it's a really great, we've gone through sort of many phases in making the film. And one of those was trying to make it with Vinny.
Mhm.
And that was years ago. And it was kind of like two cooks in the kitchen, and it doesn't really work. It's
Yeah.
like, who's going to do this? It's like, no, we have one steak and one thing. No, we can't both cook the one steak. We got to
Yeah.
like, we got to just make our own steak. So we made our own films, and it's great. More the merrier.
Mhm.
And we then changed again. We had these other editors. We kind of switched gears, and now I have my friend that I grew up with, who's really gonna make this special. And it's just our life. I mean, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to call him, and we're going to do a work session for probably 3 or 4 hours.
Mhm.
And this is what we do. And we just talk about this stuff every day and just try to craft this perfect message. So the thing is, we're trying to do something very big, right? We're trying to make this one film that will change how people think about food. And it's not just going to be a low carb film.
Mhm.
I mean, I am and always will be in the low carb community, but there's more to the story. It's how do we understand food? Why is food so complicated? Why is health and nutrition so complicated, right? Every other
Yep.
animal has it figured out. They just eat their native diet and they do well. And then as soon as humans get involved, it goes haywire, right? As soon as we start
Yeah.
feeding dogs, they get fat and sick. We start
Yep.
feeding any kind of animal, they get messed up. So it's just one of the questions is, why is nutrition so complicated? And no one wants to be fat and sick. So how did we get here?
Yeah.
Right? No one wants to just overeat, but it has happened. So these are some of the big questions. I mean, there's many sides to this movie. I don't know if I can't just like encapsulate it in a few little sentences, but I could tell you sort of a little bit about the journey we're going to go on in the film,
Mhm.
which is we're starting with, what did humans evolve to eat? Like, how did that go down?
Right.
Right? Like a lot of these films, they don't have time or they don't have the interest to go through the story. And for you and I know we have that interest in meat eating and why is it healthy and how did we get here? You can't just skip that part.
Yeah.
And once you go into that detail, you figure out a lot of things about humans, about bioavailability, about our ancestors, about fat, about how we ran on fat, how we were fat hunters. There's a great paper called Man, the Fat Hunter
Right.
by Mickey Bendor, one of the guests I had on my podcast. And so, yeah, so we go through the history of meat eating and why we require this nutrient dense food and why we can't just subsist on plant foods and why plant foods are a great fallback food, right? It's a great
Yeah.
thing if you have a failed hunt and there's all kinds of environmental factors that may have failed you. Could have been bad luck, could have been a area with no animals. It could have been a time of the year. It could have been time of the Earth's history,
Mhm.
right? Where we didn't have access to animals for a short time. So it makes sense that we've sort of developed this other metabolism. I think of it as almost a separate metabolism. There's the primary optimal metabolism, which is a fat burning metabolism that
Mhm.
allows you to always have energy because you store fat on your body and you can seamlessly transition between your food and your own energy. And the fallback metabolism, the failed environment metabolic state where we have to subsist on low quality plant foods. We dig up some tubers, maybe we get some leaves. People think that we had all these vegetables just just gardens and gardens of vegetables back in the day. It's so funny. No, we cultivated these all.
Yep.
They were few and far between. I mean, maybe there was a few edible shrubs and stuff, but maybe we use those for medicine, really. I mean, really what we had is fruit and tubers. And the fruit wasn't the same that we have now either.
Yeah.
People kind of understand we have all this genetically modified fruits, or even just natural selection of humans selecting better fruits, and you know what I mean, and making them juicier, sweeter, more sugar, bigger, all that stuff. And so we didn't have a consistent energy source based on carbs. Carbs were the non sort of consistent source, right? Meat and fat were the consistent source that we could get. And if you watch these shows, I don't watch the shows like Alone. You know, it's on Netflix now, these survival shows. All they do is they go for fish or meat. That's how they survive. The winners are the guys that kill the animal. And so we have this. Okay, this is going to make a good point here. So the fallback metabolism, this state where we can survive on low quality plant foods and lots of carbs, or maybe lots of fruits and vegetables, that is a temporary state, and that we've developed that so that we don't die. But now part of the confusion with the modern world, like I said, it's super confusing, right? It's like, hey, this is the best, vegan's good, or vegetarian, or why is it so conflicting? How come the carnivore guys do so well, but then also some of these vegetarian people seem to be doing okay for, you know, maybe a smaller amount of time? But it's because of this. It's because we have this secondary suboptimal state, and we can lose weight that way. So the thing is, most people need to lose weight in the world, in the US and the world. So we confuse diets that allow weight loss to be good diets, right? So if you're eating a diet of these low quality, suboptimal foods without enough protein, without enough nutrients, these plant food diets or these high carb diets, if you go low fat enough, right, you can lose weight. Because you're just not getting enough energy in your body. So yes, of course, if you have a caloric deficit, you're going to lose weight. The hard part is how to get a caloric deficit. And so a lot of these vegan advocates, they find a way to get a caloric deficit because they're just eating so much volume of low quality foods. They're just not getting enough calories. And so yes, they're losing weight. And then they conflate this with a good, healthy diet.
Right.
So I just spit out a lot of stuff at you. So I don't know if you wanted to jump in or comment on any of that.
Well, and I know with several, I know with, like, with example, in the Game Changers, a lot of these guys that say, look at this muscle guy who is vegan. Unfortunately, they didn't gain the muscle on a vegan diet. They now became vegan in many times after the fact. And a lot of people, they do get healthier eating vegan because they quit eating the highly processed, you know, loaded with high fructose corn syrup garbage. So yes, if you go from a standard American diet to that, it's healthier, but it's not going to be optimal for your body. So we'll back up then. How did we get here? Because I know that was something you mentioned is you were working on in part of the movie. Is what got us to this point where we're at today, where everybody's overweight. We just accepted the fact that, you know, as I get older, the belly's going to get bigger. My hunch is going to get bigger. I'm just going to feel miserable. And yet that really is not the way we should be.
Yeah, that actually is the next step in the film. So it's the evolutionary component, right? Then we move into where we went wrong, which is kind of the agricultural revolution. And we settled down and we started relying on grains, and we thought it was a more reliable source of calories. And I mean, Jared Diamond, you know, famous author, calls it the worst mistake in human history, is that it allowed us to have cities and it allowed us to have all these things. So yes, there were some benefits, but it really tanked our health. And we know, if you look up remains of humans, that before and after agriculture, we were way more robust, we were taller, we were stronger, we had bigger brains before this agricultural revolution. And we got a lot shorter. You could even just look at height really correlates to health as a population, right? Not on an individual basis, although it does. I mean, you could have stunted growth if you're not getting proper nutrition.
True.
But on a population basis, you can correlate height with health. And we've been getting shorter for a lot of the time, especially when, like, during the World War I and II, or even during the dark ages, you know, the 1500s, like our
Mm-hmm.
average height was really low. It was like 5'5", 5'4", you know, and then as nations or in times of history get better health, their height grows. So you can kind of see us coming back now. But the
Yeah.
problem is now we now in the modern times, we'll just start around 1880. We kind of ran out of problems, and we made some mistakes. So I think that's where the big anti-meat stuff started, was around 1880s, because
Mm-hmm.
meat was regarded as the healthiest thing you could eat. It was the most prized food for all of history, until I guess the first time people started talking about was the Seventh Day Adventists,
Yeah.
this religious group with Ellen G. White, and yeah, it kind of made sense, because she just had this idea that we should eat a Garden of Eden diet. It's this pure diet, it's vegetables, and that the men were drinking a lot. There was not a lot of women's rights back then, and they
Mm-hmm.
could, you know, be beating their wives, all this type of stuff, and so they associated meat eating with violence, and it goes on to this. The story of grains and Kellogg's, and you know, the
Yeah.
Kellogg cereal, and it's a long history that Dr. Gary Fettke, a great doctor out of Australia,
Yeah.
talks about, and with his wife Belinda. So I'd recommend them. But we just had these bad ideas, right? We started blaming meat on our problems. We didn't have all the good science yet back then, so we also were smoking a lot, right? These are
Yep.
the 1930s, 40s, 50s. We were making these hydrogenated oils. You know, people know about trans fats, right? That's the one big thing that we figured out was bad,
Yeah. True.
finally. But we went through this era. You know, Crisco was invented, and it was originally oil for machinery. It was like we had this leftover cotton seeds, and we
Yep.
used it for lubricating machinery. And then someone had the bright idea
To
to make
bleach
it
it
into
and make
something
it into
edible.
a quote unquote food product, which is just nasty.
Highly processed, bleached, deodorized, you know, whatever, 17-step process, whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll sell it as food, you know, and they had good marketing plans, you know, don't use the lard like your grandma, be a modern woman, and,
Yep.
you know, use the clean Crisco. So this is what was happening, 40s, 50s, smoking, you know, all this stuff. We just started getting into these processed foods, especially from the war. And we thought that these like it's almost like the space race, you know, we got
Mm.
Tang, it's so futuristic, it's so cool, like processing foods is the future. And that's where we really went astray. And then I won't go into the whole Ansel Keys story, but people in
Right.
the low carb community will know Ansel Keys, and just this kind of correlation data throughout, you know, studied 22 countries throughout, all of them that didn't fit, and then
Yep.
showed that in the 7 countries that he picked, it seemed to correlate with more saturated fat equaled more heart disease. So this was what was happening in the 50s. So I think this is the real mistakes we made back then, is all the things I've said about the bad things, the bad food habits and food industries that were coming into our life, and smoking and all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
But then we didn't have the good science. We had some correlations that maybe saturated fat was bad.
Yeah.
So back then we didn't know, we thought that a calorie was a calorie back then. Okay, so this is big that I'm trying to put in the film that I don't hear that many people talking about, is that if you think a calorie is a calorie and there's no difference between protein or carbs or fat, then you would just demonize fat because it has more calories per gram,
Correct.
right? So if you think a calorie is a calorie, you're going to demonize fat. Then they're like, oh, okay. And then this guy, you know, said that the more countries eating more fat got more heart disease. Done deal. They
Mm-hmm.
even said, what's the worst that could happen? We'll recommend a low fat diet. You know, it has more calories per gram. People just need to eat less, move more.
Yep.
That's the solid solution to everything. Eat less, move more. And so, and then also they didn't realize that protein wasn't the same as energy. So energy
Right.
is carbs or fat. So now we know there's a thermic effect of food, and that there's this higher satiety with protein, and that protein, the thermic effect means it takes more energy for your body to break down protein. And also protein is the building block. It's not, it shouldn't, a lot of people, I think Dr. Ben Bickman is one of them, saying that we shouldn't even consider protein calories the same as energy calories.
Right.
Right? They're not the same. They don't count the same. It's absurd to just count them the same.
Yep.
And even the people who are against are against low carb, they still agree. They're like, yeah, well, if you equate for protein, you know, you always know that you have to equate for protein because is the important factor.
Yeah.
So we also didn't think there was a difference between processed carbs or fats and whole carbs or fats, right? We're just like, yeah, I mean, a potato is the same as orange juice, or orange juice is great.
Yep.
You know, orange juice is great. Oh, you get vitamin C. No, this is completely different, right? Calories interact with your body very differently. And this is what I've discovered. I've interviewed over 150 people in the past couple of years. And really the unifying theme that I found is based around the level of processing has a lot to do with it, right? The level of processing, each time you process a food down from its whole form, it gets less healthy. And that's why the low carb lifestyle is so great, because a lot of us are eating mostly whole foods, right? You're like, hey, I'm not afraid of meat. I'm not afraid of bacon and cheese and this stuff. These are great whole foods.
Yep.
And if you start cutting out the processed foods, you're going to do a lot better. Like you said, for the vegans, I love that point. When the vegans cut out all those processed foods, of course you're going to do better because they're eating whole foods now. So really all that matters is you eating whole foods. That's a real ticket. And I've studied like cultures around the world. I am going to Africa actually for the film in January to live with some of these tribes in Africa. But I've been around the world too, just here and there, and sort of looked into people. And there's research papers, there's all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And all the healthy people, free of chronic disease, are just basically eating whole food diets.
Yes.
And then some of them are low carb. A lot of them are low carb and high meat, and then some of them are high carb and lower meat. And this is again why vegans will try to make these claims, because they'll just be like, oh, well, the Okinawans, they eat a plant-based diet. And well, they actually don't really. The ancient version, modern Okinawans might be, right? The fast food always creeps in, flour, sugar, oil creeps in, but they were eating a lot of pork. They eat a lot of fish. They regard pork as a longevity food. But due to their, it's an island out off of Japan, and they didn't have tons of beef and they didn't have tons of meat. So yes, they ate fish and they ate vegetables and they ate rice and they were healthy. But that's not surprising at all. Yeah. They're getting nutrient dense animal foods, and they're not getting too much fat, right? So they're kind of going into that backup metabolism, the fallback metabolism. They're eating a lot of carbs, sweet potatoes. Oh, actually, I think they had more sweet potatoes back then than rice, really. Rice is more of a new thing. Well, for Okinawa at least. But okay, they're eating whole foods. They're doing the high carb, low fat, but it's not the food pyramid.
Right.
It's not involving processed foods, and they're doing great. So the common theme, Dr. Weston Price went around the world and studied all these cultures in the 1930s and found the same thing. I love talking about him because he found all these different cultures, from the Swiss Alps to Australia to Africa to the islands in the middle of the Pacific. They did the same things. They highly regarded animal foods. They had even practices around pregnancy and before having kids to eat these special foods. And they all were super healthy and had great teeth. This guy was a dentist. Great teeth, which is a sign of good health, like height. And they also, what they didn't do is eat the sugar, the refined grains, and the seed oils, right? So it was all the same. And as soon as the population that he studied, he found some of them that were sort of just outside the city, so they weren't kind of tainted by the modern foods. And then as soon as they started he found people that were starting to get the modern foods. There was trade, and they started sending in the sacks of flour and the oil and the sugar for trade. They started getting in their diet and rapidly started losing their health. Yeah. Right. Rapidly. And this wasn't genetics. These are the same family, right? It's the same family, same genetics. The older brother eating native food diet, tall, strong, good teeth, good health. Younger brother, just failure to thrive, bad teeth, susceptible to disease, all kinds of stuff. So, man, I'm just going through a lot of things here. But what part of my point was the whole foods is the key, and that the animal foods are the key. And that processed calories or processed carbs are fat, right? A processed carb people can understand, right? That's a flour, a sugar. A processed fat are the vegetable oils, which seed oils, right? So that's processing them. So if you get either versions of those aren't good for you,
Mhm.
although they could have the same calories as another food that's a
Yep.
whole version. So that's it. That's what we got wrong. We didn't have all the good science back then. We jumped to some conclusions. We thought that protein was the same as any other calories. We thought that processed carbs and fat were the same as whole fat and carbs.
Yep.
And that's it. That's how we went wrong. That's
Yeah.
the whole story. What happened from there? Processed food industries took over. If we're saying fat's bad, let's make foods that are low fat. If you remove the fat, the food doesn't taste good. Well, sugar's fine, right? Refined grains, sugar. Oh, these are cheap ingredients that are fine because a calorie is a calorie, right? So why not just stuff everything with the cheapest, longest shelf life possible? It's so simple how it just plays out. Then they start making more money. They're like, oh, these process. It's like, so now there's a huge profit margin on these foods. It's the cheapest ingredients possible. Protein is the most expensive ingredient. So the protein's diluted out of all these processed foods that, the more protein, the more expensive the product is. So all these snacks and bags and treats and this and that, notice how little protein's in all of them. Right? Chips, cookies, cracker, all this stuff is very low protein. And I know the profits in the processing. We maybe we could talk about my company Nose to Tail later, but I have this company based on grass-fed meat, and I know that there's no profit in it. I'm barely making a living. It's because I pay it all to the process of growing the animal. There's all these costs associated with growing an animal. There's no brand name meats, really. You know what I mean? Like you go to the grocery store, you just get meat. You go to the grocery, even just vegetables, you just get vegetables. There's no brand names. There's no markup. There's no big markup on them. There's no big profit margin on them. So it's no wonder that these industries took over. They have all the marketing money. They control all the media with that marketing money. They have lobbyists to keep these things in place. Part of it too is just America had a lot of corn, wheat, and soy. We had a lot of land that we could just grow crops on. Like, what are we going to do with this? And the government subsidized the corn, wheat, and soy. And that even how factory farming really works too, is because we have this cheap corn, wheat, and soy. Let's give it to animals. And actually, if we want to talk about that for a brief second, it's actually pretty efficient though, because a lot of it's not just fed straight to cows, at least maybe chickens and pigs, because they require a different nutrition, more closer to humans, but cattle and sheep and buffalo and bison eat grass. They eat these low quality foods. So we can grow ethanol for corn, right? So we can make our corn for ethanol and we can make, this clean source of energy. And then we have, so that's what the corn's grown for, a lot of it. And then we give the leftovers after that process is done to the cattle. It's actually a pretty efficient system. But I mean, obviously regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture is better. But
and ironically, I listened to most of Rogan and Dr. Paul Saladino's podcast today. So a lot of what you've said, I'm sort of going, I heard this somewhere today. Oh yeah, that's where. It's back with World War I, World War II. They needed to rely on that secondary source of fuel for our bodies because we're in the middle of world wars. We don't know where food's going to come from. And again, the government started subsidizing a lot of that corn and soy production to have as that secondary food source. And unfortunately, it continued on from there. It didn't just stop as the war stopped. And like you said, we didn't have the science. I think it was McGovern who just said, we can't wait for the science. We just have to do something. And this is where it's gotten us today, sick, fat, and overweight, which is sad. And, it's why you, myself, and so many others are trying to get the word out that that's not normal for us. And it should not be normal. And there is a better way to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a sad thing that happened, and it steamrolled it snowballed, it just kind of kept going. So I mean, this anti-meat agenda has been there for a while. And even in this, you move to the 60s, 70s, it was all of this hippie kind of, like we're ruining the world. We need to save the world. And again, meat was demonized. It's like, oh, it's taking too much resources. Then it got to the 80s and 90s, and then they were trying to blame meat on cancer and all these other things. And I mean, I, I had a guy, Dr. David Klurfeld, on my podcast, who was part of the WHO working group in 2015 that, well, not him, he was against it, but that group decided that meat was a carcinogen. So anything
Yep.
that you've heard about meat causing cancer or meat being bad for you, it's basically all from this one WHO working group.
Yep.
And, you know, there's a lot of different interests that the WHO has. And I won't get into all those, but it's not necessarily human health, I think. They have this idea that they're going to feed the world with plant foods and processed foods.
Yep.
And so this Dr. David Klurfeld said, hey, I was on this panel. He's a USDA scientist. He's like middle of the road guy. He's like, balanced diet, you know,
Yep.
get your meat, get your veggies, get your, you know, he's like, whatever, doesn't matter. But he wasn't a carnivore guy, right? It's
You're
not
right.
like Saladino was on this panel. Middle of the road guy, he goes there, he's like, hey, all these people are vegans and vegetarians. Like, why is this group, you know, he's talking to them that they're like, oh yeah, we're vegan, we're vegetarian. They're ignoring his studies. They're purposely ignoring his studies. The whole point of working groups is to bring studies to the table to show all the sides. They threw out his studies. So basically, there's a lot more to it, but just a lot of correlation was used. They didn't look at a lot of studies, and they decided that meat was bad. So now we're stuck with this. So that's just one more piece to the puzzle.
It is, and that's something a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of what we have is either, well, back to the Seventh-day Adventists, they actually produce, is it 3/4 of the education materials for nutrition, if I remember correctly, through the publishing houses, and they admit that. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying something, oh, you're picking on them. They freely admit it.
They're
And of
proud
course,
of it.
yep. And then of course, like you said, a lot of these people writing our guidelines, they're just basically saying, well, this is what I do. And they all get together basically and come up with these guidelines like you were talking about with the World Health Organization. And I do remember listening to that podcast, that episode of yours. It was mind-blowing listening to how he was basically railroaded right on out because he didn't agree with everybody else. And with that, I mean, I know a lot of these processed foods, something that I was thinking of as you were talking about them, they say all over the package, it's fortified with iron, vitamins, minerals. So let's take a few minutes and talk about nutrient density, because I know that just because it says it's fortified with it doesn't mean your body's actually going to be able to take advantage of that. In many cases, not to sound crass, it's just going to pass right out the backside and keep on rolling, and your body's never going to be able to use it. So let's go through how, you know, meat in particular is much more nutrient dense for our bodies.
Yeah, this is another one of these sad things that happen where we thought that we could just engineer our way out of problems. This is another big theme I found, is that humans think that technology is going to save us and that we're going to have the processed foods and we're just going to fortify them. We're so smart. We've isolated these vitamins and minerals and we can just put them in. We'll take apart the food and put them back together and it's going to be just as good. And that never really works in nature. Yes, we can have an amazing cell phone, an amazing TV and all that stuff because that's different. We're not interrupting biological systems and natural systems. We're just building technology on the outside. But when you start getting into humans and health and all these complex systems, it doesn't work like that. So the same thing happened with the healthcare system, is we thought we could just have a pill and a surgery and all these interventions and pharmaceuticals and it'll save us. It's like, how great is this, man? We are so smart. We are on the way to a bright future here with our pills and our pharmaceuticals, and it doesn't work, right? They mask symptoms. They don't treat the root cause. The food cannot be just broken down and put together again. It doesn't work like that, right? So more specifically, why is because food, the vitamins and minerals need to be bioavailable. So like you're saying, is the animal foods, it is bioavailable. It is in a form that the human body can use, right? And it's very complex, right? I'm saying you can't hack the body. You need certain coenzymes and this and just not having anti-nutrients for one. Like with plants have the anti-nutrients that block absorption of certain things. And great studies on this where you can look at the iron in oysters, and they had these participants eat oysters, and they found the plasma iron in the blood, right? And it's okay, this is what it is. Great. Then you have eat the oysters with spinach, and it blocks absorption. A lot of oxalates in spinach, and this blocked the absorption of some of the iron. Then they had the participants eat it with a corn tortilla and spinach. And wait, was it spinach? Hope I'm getting this right. If not, it's very similar to this.
Yep.
And
I
they ate
remember hearing
corn
it.
tortilla, the spinach, and the oysters, and they got none of the iron. Their plasma level of iron were the same. So people know that corn, there's phytates, there's lectins, there's all these different anti-nutrients that block absorption of vitamins. So not only are plants, there's three problems. They have anti-nutrients that block absorption of the vitamins and minerals. They aren't as bioavailable because they are in a different form, right? It's this format that, eating meat, like we're made of meat. And if we eat meat and fat, it's a easily accessible form. And also they don't have complete nutrients. Like the protein is not complete. So it's another problem with plants. And so there's all these sort of downsides to eating plants, but it's not very convenient to talk about when you're trying to push these high profit margin diets and, ways that we're going to feed the world. And
and it does make it tough. I mean, because it is easy, as you and I both know, to make cheap product, high profit margin and go. Whereas, we're both doing the opposite. We're going with the protein, nutrient dense products going, how are we going to make money off of this? But we also know this is what people need. It's healthy for them. And it is a complete source. Like you mentioned with the oysters and the iron, it happens with lots of other vitamins and minerals where our daily recommended intake, is based upon the way a standard American diet, but yet people that are eating, let's just say mostly carnivore or, a low carb keto diet, they're eating healthier foods and products so that your body's not fighting to get those nutrients. So if you're eating processed junk, your body has to, the receptors for the vitamins and minerals are fighting with the garbage. So you need to eat more vitamin C, for example, to get what you need when you eat all that extra stuff. Whereas if you're eating
and
meat,
also,
go ahead.
Yeah, you're getting it directly. But I also kind of forgot along the same lines is a lot of the plant foods just have the precursors to the vitamins. That's another thing I meant to say about the bioavailability is that a good example is beta-carotene compared to retinol. So vitamin A, people are like, oh man, carrots, vitamin A, retinol, all this, or beta-carotene. Your bodies can't convert that, and not everyone can convert it well. So if you're eating the retinol in its animal form, right? That's the whole form. You can get it much easier. And the same thing goes with DHA. So our brain, like omega-3s, right? People know about the omega-3s. They're healthy, right? People are like, oh, well, plant-based people are like, oh, I can get from flax seeds or something. Like I can get omega-3 from plant sources. And you're not getting the real DHA that your brain and body need.
Right.
You're getting the precursor to those. And yes, some people can convert better than others, but it's not the same.
Yep. And completely different. Same with, I know that if you were to look at how much of a vegetable you need to eat compared to, a couple of ounces of steak, for example, the volume you would have to eat to actually be able to process that properly to get what
protein,
you need, especially with protein and even some of the vitamins and minerals, it's like, cups upon cups upon cups of spinach. And it's like, you couldn't eat that in a week, let alone a meal, which a lot of people don't understand. Plus, you cannot get all necessary vitamins and minerals out of plants. It's not possible. That's why vegans have vitamin B deficiencies. It's only, there are many things you can only get from animal products. And oh, by the way, we can get everything we need out of animal products. I know a lot of people would argue, oh, no, well, you've been lied to, basically, because we can. Go look at many of the carnivores out there that are eating just meat. They don't have scurvy. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're healthier than they've ever been. if everything we've been told is true, they should be dead. I mean, plain
Yeah.
and simple. I mean, you and I both have met so many of those people, like we've mentioned already, Dr. Saladino and others that have proven that not to be the case.
It's great. I love these guys because they're proving it.
Yeah.
They're being examples to the world. Dr. Sean Baker's another one. You don't have to agree with him on everything, and I don't necessarily agree with long-term 100% carnivore diets, but I just love it. He goes on. We went on Joe Rogan's podcast almost 3 years ago and talked about it to the world and let people know you have been lied to. And it really is cool that this is a huge community too. There's a whole website, meatheals.com, and all these people are sharing their stories. And yeah, it's just great to know it's possible. But I say, hey, why don't we just do like 90% animal foods? You know, I think there's more realistic for a lot of people. I'm calling it the sapient diet. And I am thinking that everyone kind of in our meat world is going to get there eventually.
Yep.
And that it's just kind of all encompassing too. It kind of just encompasses paleo, keto, low carb, carnivore. So
yep. And I one thing I do like about Dr. Baker is he freely admits you don't have to eat this way. It is what works for him. He understands. Have your avocados, have your vegetables. It's, you know, that's great for everybody. Do what's best for you. What I like about a carnivore diet is it's the ultimate elimination diet. Eat meat for a month, for example, especially if you're dealing with autoimmune issues, you got problems, and slowly reincorporate things and find out, oh, that was what was causing the problem. And now you know not to touch it again, or to, you know, avoid it as, you know, more often than you think you would have. That's my personal, why I really like it, is it helps you figure out what is causing problems in your body as you slowly reincorporate non-animal based foods into your diet.
that's super important because I think it's amazing. It's amazing for that. And I work with a guy, Dr. Gary, and you know, he's a doctor, and we use it. We believe in it. It's a great starting place. And then you got to work with the patient and see where they want to go from there.
Yeah.
And I don't think you want to do anything exactly the same for years and years on end.
Right.
I don't think you want to do keto for years and years on end. Right. It's like, our ancestors ate seasonally and you ate what's available. And you don't want to eat the same thing over and over again. I think that's part of the reason people have problems with plant foods and people have problems with oxalates, and that we mentioned, you know, that's in spinach and it's in kale and it's in these kind of cruciferous vegetables. Well, we're eating these things every single day. Yep. And they're promoted as these superfoods. People are eating them every day for years, and then they have kidney stones and they have joint problems. Well, no one should eat anything every day except for meat, right?
Yes.
Like meat is the one thing that our body can thrive on and needs, and you know, every day. So other than that, I wouldn't do anything that consistently because it's not really evolutionary accurate, and your body just isn't used to that, right? We had seasons, we had fruit. Fruit's not going to kill you.
Nope.
Right? Like you can eat, I mean, maybe you want to wait till you get to your goal weight or near your goal weight before you start eating a lot of fruit, or maybe you just want to do it seasonally in the summer, or maybe you can eat some lower carb fruit, like some berries and stuff. But it's just seasonal, right? It's just,
exactly.
you gotta be kind of logical about this stuff.
Yep. And I think we're just so used to having everything all the time that, well, if it's good for you a little bit, it's good for you all the time. And it's not. And the point you made about the oxalates, it's just something I never thought of before. I mean, I've dealt with them. I know what it's like, and it never hit me. It's because, well, prior to, you know, the last 100 years or so, we did eat seasonally. So we didn't have spinach and kale and everything else 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always available for us. It was for a short period of time in the summer we could have the stuff, but meat was always there. And so our bodies wouldn't build up those oxalates because we weren't stuffing ourselves with it all the time. So which I just, one of those things that I'm glad you said it, because it never hit me in that way. And then, like you said, with seasonally, I'm just not a fruit person. But this, we went on a trip to mountains in North Carolina. You know, apples are what they're known for. Of course, my kids, they have fruit every now and then. That's dessert for them. And so, you know what? I'm curious. I happen to have a CGM for 2 weeks, and I had an apple. And I was like, okay, it didn't mean it. I just didn't care for it. I didn't want another one. But my sugars didn't shoot through the roof by having an apple.
Mm-hmm.
That's 30 carbs. Those were my 30 carbs that I had all day. And okay, that's great. But seasonally, when it's
Mm-hmm.
normally available, when it's not, you're done. We should move on from it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a good illustration of the level of processing I mentioned earlier. If you
Mm-hmm.
eat an apple that is unprocessed, the cell walls are not broken down.
Yep.
It comes along with the fiber. The glucose comes along with the fiber, and you digest it slower.
Yep.
And you don't get a blood sugar spike. If you were to just drink plain apple juice, you would have had a blood sugar spike.
I did.
Uh-huh.
The fresh apple cider. So I had a small cup, and it might have been equivalent to a 1 cup measuring a day or two later. And sure enough, shot up to about 110. Came down relatively quickly. I was surprised at that. But yeah, I was like, again, the nostalgia. It's like, I used to drink this all the time, and it didn't taste as good as I remembered. And I also did the experiment to see what it would do to my body. It's like, well, it went up, came back down, off I went. So yeah, it's interesting to see how your body responds to different foods and so forth. And those apple juices are straight, it's sugar. They squeeze the
Mm-hmm.
sugar out, and that's what you're drinking.
It's just not what we were used to.
Yeah.
It's not what our bodies are used to. And I like your point too, is that it's like, yeah, I did it and I'm done. It's like, I
Yep.
had an apple, whatever. Like I've never been a fruit person either. I've never really understood it. It's like, it's just sugar. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fine. I don't think there's a lot of nutrient value. People think that fruit is magic.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the USDA data tables. Go to any data table on the whole internet and whatever. You will see very low nutrients in fruit.
Yes.
Compare it to any animal food, and it is blown away.
Yep.
This is, I'm not even talking about bioavailability yet, even.
Right.
But people think that fruit is this magical wonder food. You know, it's like, oh my God, I'm like a health hero. You know, I'm eating a banana. Wow. There's more potassium in avocado than
avocado. That's
there's
exactly what I
way
was
less
thinking.
sugar. Yeah, there's way less sugar in avocado. These plant foods, it's all smoke and mirrors, you know? It's crazy, especially fruit. Like it just doesn't have the minerals and vitamins that you think it does. Just look at the data.
Yeah. It's just, you tell a lie often enough, everybody believes it. Is what, I mean,
Yeah.
is really what
I
it
mean, it
comes
does have
down to.
vitamin C is one of the only things it really has, right?
Yep.
But it's like vitamin C is not a hard thing to get. It's not like there's vitamin C in lots of foods. There's vitamin C in liver. There's vitamin C in fresh meat. Really, if you don't burn it to a crisp. There's vitamin C in sauerkraut, right?
Yeah.
There's
Fermented
I love
foods are
eating
great.
fermented foods.
Yep.
It has vitamin C in it. All the fermented foods have vitamin C. So I just have no time for fruit. I just don't really get it.
Yeah. I don't either. I mean, growing up, I would eat it, but now I'm like, nah, give me my steak and I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would say, yeah, but steak doesn't have vitamin C. And most people don't realize the only reason they claim that is because when they did the testing, they said, it doesn't have vitamin C, so we're not even going to test for it. So
why would it?
that's
Yeah,
where
they
it
didn't even
came
get
from.
it. Yeah.
It's like, well, you can't tell me it doesn't have it if you didn't even go find out. But that's where that came from, and obviously it does have it. Again, back to all the carnivores that we do know that are surviving just fine.
Well, they knew that too from other historical accounts before we had all the science about vitamin C.
Mm-hmm.
So sailors knew that they finally discovered they needed vitamin C, and they would use lime or lemons or fruit. But they also realized that if you had fresh meat, they could get it too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if they had enough fresh meat, the thing is the sailors didn't have fresh meat. They had dried meat and hardtack and stuff like that. Yep. Right. So they did notice, maybe with some other explorers too, that would maybe go up into the Arctic and find that they weren't getting scurvy up there. And it's because
there's no fruit and vegetables.
There's no fruit, but they're eating fresh meat. And it's not like tons and tons and tons of it, but it's certainly fine to live off of.
And speaking of fresh meat, you already mentioned nose to tail. So let's get into that a little bit. What possessed you to start nose to tail and start offering the grass-fed finished meats that you guys have available there?
Well, yeah, I didn't want to take on sponsors or anything, right? I never wanted to do other people's products. I didn't, even for the film, I didn't want outside interest getting involved in my film. I think it's
Yep.
just easier to just stay aside from any of these influences. And so this was the one thing that I believed in, right? This is the grass-fed meat. So I
Yeah.
basically just put it together as, even though I kind of knew I wasn't going to make much money, there's not a lot of profit margin, but
Yeah.
this is something I believed in. And yeah, I mean, we just send it out. It's out of Texas and it goes to the 48 states. And what's also great about it is you get nose to tail, the organs, you get the bones, right? This is
Hmm.
an important part. And I kind of had to learn myself when I started is you can't just get a bunch of, or it's like, oh, just everyone's like, why are you out of liver? Well, the animal has one liver,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, why do you run out of ribeyes? Well, there's only a certain
So
amount
many
of ribeyes in an
ribeyes.
animal. You have to use the whole animal. Okay,
Yep.
this is what this is how nature works, and this is how to be good to the environment, right? You want to use all of the animal.
Yep.
I had a great guy, Dr. Bill Schindler. He's a professor. He found they used a deer. They took the amount of calories in a regular cuts of deer meat that you get if you hunt a deer,
Hmm.
and they got, if you ate it nose to tail, if you ate the organs, if you ate all the fat, if you ate the bone marrow, all that stuff, twice as many calories from the deer, same deer,
Wow.
twice as many. He did a whole research project with his students. So this is how to be environmentally friendly, is eat the whole animal,
Yep.
use it. And you can't just sell, oh, well, we want more ribeyes, so we're just going to sell more ribeyes. No, we have to use the whole cow.
Yep. Which
And
makes sense.
so, yep. So we use the bones. You get the bones for bone broth. You get the liver. We have the organs. Maybe people don't like eating organs.
Hmm.
I wasn't a great fan of organs until recently, right? It tastes weird. So we
Yes.
grind it up and put it in the ground beef. And
Yep.
I'm glad you got a hold of some of that. And it's a good way to eat it.
It is. Uh, we got some. We tried both their Primal ground beef, which is 30% organ, 70% beef, and the Primal Light, which is just 5% organ to 95% beef, and it tastes amazing. I seasoned them both up, and I intentionally kept it simple. So we had hamburgers. That way, we could actually taste what was in the meat, and with the light, so that was only the 5%. My wife's like, I swear my body's craving another one. And as you know, when you saw that, you're like, yeah, she probably was. It was your body going, those are the nutrients I'm looking for. And then when we tried the Primal, it, I didn't notice any different taste, and yet it just seemed better. There's no other way to put it. I mean, it goes back to that craving almost of this just tastes better than ground beef with, the spleen and the heart and the liver all mixed in there, and some of the other organs.
It's amazing. And I just think it tastes like rich. It's like almost like other ground is taste diluted after you have it. And it goes to some other studies that when we look at all different mammals, we have some great studies. I've had some people come on my show and talk about how these animals have instincts to, they know, the cows know, the sheep know what to eat. They know
Yeah.
they eat different things at different times. They even do these blinded placebo tests where they put certain nutrients in feed than others, odorless, tasteless, yet the cows know which one to go for,
Yeah.
right? If they're deficient in this certain nutrient. And I believe that humans have this. And I think that's why our ancestors figured all this stuff out. I mentioned Dr. Weston Price traveling on the world, and they all had these same practices around pregnancy. And they were eating the organs, they were eating fish eggs and regular eggs and fat and livers and kidneys and bone marrow.
Yep.
And why? Well, how did all these different civilizations or tribes all over the world figure it out? It's because we have instincts and we have trial and error, and we realize, hey, I ate this and I felt great. I had more energy. Or this woman, man, she was, crushing all those livers from the animal, and she had such a great child. Or every child she had was,
Yep.
strong and healthy. They just put it together. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And I know people always like, why am I always hungry? And I always go back to I can go to a Chinese buffet, eat 5 plates, and an hour later I'm hungry. Well, when you're eating insanely nutrient deficient food stuff, that's why your body is saying, I'm hungry. You didn't nourish your body. It's looking for the proper nutrients and stuff, and that's why you're hungry again. Whereas eating a animal-based diet with, organs and stuff built in, I find I'm not as hungry as I used to be for the majority of my life. I can go on one meal a day or 2 meals a day because I'm properly nourishing my body. And I think that's something that most people have never even experienced. They don't understand that what it's like to get up, have a cup of coffee, and go to work. They got to get up and eat whatever it is that they have for breakfast, and then have their snack, and then have their lunch, and then have their snack. And when you're not eating nutrient-dense foods like you offer with Nose to Tail, your body's craving what it needs. Start giving it what it needs, and it helps out.
I like that. A lot of people don't even know what it feels like to be properly satiated, to like really have, like, there are some people, they've been so brainwashed and they're so into the wrong paradigm, the plant-based paradigm, that they've never been truly satiated after a meal and felt good nutrition and didn't feel bloated and felt full for hours on end. It's 2 p.m. for me now. I haven't eaten since last night. I feel fantastic. And people have never felt this. And I was one of them. I went through my life when I was a carb burner, right? We're fat burners, right? So the carb burner, you need the energy every hour, every 2 hours. That's why you have all the snacks. That's why you gain weight. So as a carb burner, then I always had a pretty fast metabolism, and my stomach would hurt. I would get like actual pains if I didn't eat in a certain amount of hours. And I just thought this is how my life went. And I just went my whole life like that. And then I got fat adapted. I ate these nutrient dense meals, and I've never had it since. I can fast for 24 hours and I won't care.
It's an amazing feeling. And I've talked to lots of people that I'll never skip breakfast, or I'll never skip breakfast and lunch. Or other clients, I never even discussed it with them. And on their own, they're like, hey, his wife, a friend of mine, he's like, my wife, you're like, hey, it's lunchtime. He goes, no, it's not. What do you mean? It's 12, 1 o'clock. It's lunchtime. He goes, I'm not hungry. It isn't lunchtime. I didn't tell him that. Figured it out on his own by getting rid of the carbs and the processed foods and just sticking to an animal based with some vegetables on the side. And that's something I wish everybody could experience and understand, that you don't have to revolve your life around food. It is a fuel source. That's really what it is. And use it as such.
I love it. So densely, move intensely.
Yes, I've shared that several times. Eat densely and move intensely. It is the two things. If you do, it will be life-changing, to say the least. So let's see here. What's one simple recipe, your favorite, just simple recipe that you would recommend for people living a simple low carb lifestyle?
Oh, wow. I only do simple recipes. This is the beauty of it. My trick is just have any meat, have a seasoning. I know you have your select savory seasonings. And then have fermented vegetables. So the seasonings, obviously, they just sit, in your pantry. Meat can be in the freezer, and the fermented vegetables, they don't go bad. And the fermented vegetables, not only do they have vitamin C, they have probiotic, and they also don't have as many anti-nutrients. Right? So I've stopped eating a lot of just regular vegetables, really. And anyway, if you eat the fermented versions, I think they taste good, and they'll have less anti-nutrients, right? That fermentation kind of takes out a lot of the sugars as well. So my trick is you grab a meat, grab some seasoning, and grab some fermented vegetables that can just sit in your fridge for months, and you're set. I mean, you got a meal there.
I like that. And that's the one thing I need to start doing more is the fermented vegetables. It's just I've been learning more about that this year than I've had in the past. So that's something I'm definitely going to be working on myself. And one simple tip you would give somebody who's, looking at the simple low carb lifestyle, or they're just getting into it, and, they're maybe overwhelmed with everything, but just one simple tip you would give somebody.
Well, Maybe I'll just go with the densely part, the move intensely. So we kind of just discussed eat densely. That's nutrient dense foods. So I think if they nail that, I think a lot of people get caught up that they're thinking they need to do tons of cardio to lose weight.
Right.
Right. So, and they're like, oh, I don't have time, or I don't like to jog, or this and that. For one, you don't really need to work out to lose weight. It's fantastic. Right. There's a million reasons to work out, but weight loss is not the greatest one of them.
Yep.
And then if you move intensely, that means it's shorter, more intense stuff. Like I really only work out 15, 17 minutes a day just during the week. And I've done great. My body composition has completely changed since I used to just jog and do cardio. Yeah. And it's much better. So I'd say if you just throw around some dumbbells, do some pull-ups, do some dips, do some push-ups, just simple stuff, do it to failure. Just go hard for a short period and you're done. I think you'll get some really good change in your body, right? Yeah. And you get lasting changes too. If you build more muscle, you're going to keep burning calories for long after you work out.
Correct. And as you get older, you'll have that muscle. I tell people that my goal, to pick on somebody you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, is to be Mark Sisson. I want to be pushing 70 years old and running around embarrassing 20-year-old kids playing ultimate Frisbee. I've got a ways to go to get there. But, I don't want to, I'd rather be that than a lot of 70-year-olds who have to rely upon somebody else to be even taking care of them and feeding them and so forth. I want to thrive till it's time to go, not survive. And that if you start eating densely and moving intensely, even later in life, and I'll pick on my parents, they're in their mid to late 60s, but just switching to a low carb diet has made immense changes in their health and their well-being. So it's never too late to start.
I love it.
Where can people find you? Obviously, we got nosetatail.org for the meet and your Peak Human podcast. Anywhere else they can interact with you online?
Yeah, I'm just Food Lies on all the social media accounts. Okay. You just search for Food Lies. I'll be there. YouTube. Other than that, just sapien.org. That's kind of our main site, main company, and it's kind of the umbrella for all things: Food Lies, Nose Tail, Peak Human, everything.
Good. And I'll get that on the show notes for everybody else. And thanks for being on today. It's good to see you again. And maybe again, one of these days, a conference will open up. We all get back together again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Appreciate it.